History has a pattern. Women who step outside the expectations of their time are often labeled as something first: too loud, too difficult, too emotional, or sometimes too intelligent. Today, I want to talk about a woman who lived more than 1600 years ago and whose story still feels uncomfortably relevant. Her name was Hypatia. And in her own time, being brilliant made her really dangerous. So, who was she? Hypatia of Alexandria lived roughly between 355 and 415 CE. She was a mathematician, an astronomer, and a philosopher. And she wasn't just participating in intellectual life, she was leading it. She taught publicly. She ran a philosophical school. She had students from all across the Roman world, including political and religious elites. That alone was absolutely extraordinary because in the ancient world, women were not expected to be public intellectual authorities. And the world she lived in is something that we need to explore a little further. So, to understand Hypatia, you have to understand Alexandria. At the time, it was one of the most important intellectual centers in the world, a place of learning, debate, philosophy, science. But it was also deeply unstable. The Roman world was in the middle of a major cultural shift. Older pagan philosophical traditions were colliding with the rapid rise of Christianity. And Alexandria, in particular, was volatile. Political power, religious identity, intellectual authority, all competing with each other, all overlapping. And right in the middle of that was Hypatia, her influence. She wasn't just respected, she was influential. She advised political leaders. She was connected to the Roman governor Orestes. I hope I said that right. Her voice carried weight in decisions that really mattered. And she did all of this while remaining visibly and unapologetically present in public life. So, ancient sources describe her as teaching in public, moving through the city, how dare she, and engaging openly in intellectual debate. There's even a reference to her driving a chariot through Alexandria to deliver a lecture. Let's just pause on that for a moment. In the 4th century, publicly teaching philosophy, advising leaders, and refusing to step back. She didn't shrink. Much of, oh, sorry, something in my eye. Anyway, let's get back to it. Sorry about that. Much of Hypatia's work has been lost, but we know that she worked in mathematics, astronomy, and geometry. She wrote major commentaries on texts, and this included works by Dionysius, Apollonius, and Ptolemy. And in the ancient world, commentaries weren't minor contributions. They were how knowledge was preserved, interpreted, and advanced. Her students also credited her with refining scientific instruments such as the astrolabe and the hydrometer. So she was not just studying knowledge, she was actually out there shaping it. So, what happens when somebody like Hypatia exists in a society that isn't quite stable? When somebody holds influence that doesn't fit the expected mold? Eventually, people start to try and explain them, or contain them, or remove them. By the early 5th century, tensions in Alexandria had escalated, and there was a growing conflict between Orestes, the Roman governor, and Cyril, a powerful bishop who was around at that time. And Hypatia became associated with Orestes. And of course, the rumors began to circulate. She was accused falsely of influencing political decisions, of preventing reconciliation, and of being part of the problem. And that was the point when she stopped being seen as a philosopher and started to be seen as a threat. In 415 CE, Hypatia was attacked by a mob. She was dragged from her chariot and killed. And her death is often framed as religious violence. And yes, that was probably part of it. But historians today are clear about something important. This was absolutely also political. She was caught at the intersection of power, influence, and identity. And my gosh, did she pay the price for it? Hypatia didn't just die, though. She became symbolic, and her story came to represent the loss of classical scholarship, the dangers of ideological conflict, and the silencing of intellectual women. But what's interesting is how her story, like others, changed over time. So, within her own time, she was seen as being someone that was dangerous, politically disruptive, and too influential, too influential. But today, she's remembered as a pioneer, a symbol of intellectual freedom, and definitely a woman ahead of her time. The person didn't change, but our interpretation of them did. And this is where her story connects directly to what we're exploring in this series. Hypatia wasn't too much. She was too much for the system that she existed in. She was too intelligent, too visible, too unwilling to step back. So let's take a look at this through the neurodivergent lens. Now, I really want to approach this part carefully as we cannot diagnose historic figures. But what we can do is look at patterns. And Hypatia showed traits that today we often associate with certain cognitive styles, such as she had a deep intellectual focus. She was comfortable with abstraction. She was independent from social expectations and had a preference for ideas over conformity. And what's super interesting about how those traits are interpreted is in one context, they're seen as brilliance, and in another, they're seen as disruption. Hypatia refused to disappear. She continued to think, to teach, to lead in a world that was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with all of those things. And more than 1600 years later, her story is still asking us something. How many women have been labeled as too much simply because they refuse to shrink? Sometimes being too much is exactly what changes the world.